Hi, I am Seamless, and today is Saturday, which means it's time for a new FL Basics tutorial. Also, don't forget, tonight is the weekly stream, which began at 6 p.m. EST, which is minus 5 GMT. Yes, at justin.tv/SeamlessR. The links are in the description. You may check them for yourself. Anyway, today is going to be about image resynthesis in Harmor. So, we talked about over the last course of this whole series about how Harmor individually controls harmonics to recreate subtractive synthesis stuff, basically by changing the time in which certain harmonics turn on or off as a function of either like a frequency cutoff knob or phasor position, that kind of stuff. Today we're going to be talking about more or less the same thing. I have over here a bunch of samples open, and if you click and drag a sample into the image section, or really just onto Harmor anywhere, it will resynthesize it. And this is more or less doing the same thing. It's according to a function of time based on this image. It's telling the harmonics to turn on or off dependent upon that, and also move around in certain ways. How it actually figures that out, I'm not totally sure, but it more or less basically does it. We can zoom in real far. We can kind of see the individual sort of splits in the sound. What's cool about these is that what we're looking at, the actual middle area, what we're looking at is the morph between 2 points of harmonic data. These points, like this point sets like what everything is, and this point sets what everything is for the next point. And in the middle, we see what it looks like when it morphs in between those 2 points. And put enough points together, we get the original audio that we put in the image section. It's called the image section because you can also resynthesize pictures. Like if I were to okay, clear, open image files, what I want. Let's find a picture or something. Yeah, sure, why not? I got my Seamless. It's very large. Let's turn up the speed. You can kind of see it attempting to do a good job. There it is. Now, hilariously, if we were to actually look at an audio recording of this sound, we would see it there too, which is neat. And this is more or less doing the same thing. If we zoom in, we see all the individual points. And we can look at and see where it basically creates the image, where it says, okay, this is what this point is, this is what this point is, and this is the morph in between those 2 points. Kind of deal. This is actually how I made the picture that's on my Facebook page and my YouTube header. I put in some other image that had the word Seamless on it and messed with it in the image section, and then individually screenshot the pictures coming out of here and then stitch them together in Photoshop. That's what that's for. That's what I've done. So you can do images and stuff like that, but I typically just tend to do audio resampling. So we have a number of options available to us to screw with this. We have a bunch of time and related looping options that are in here. These are pretty self-explanatory, and you can look at the manual to see what they do, more or less. You can make loops and even some crossfading, which is pretty sweet. Which is neat. But the real important functions are the ones that we find in here. So you saw me mess with the scale knob when I was messing around with the image. And what this does is it changes the frequency scale, which is this sort of like you see the harmonics are moving around up and down and all over the place, as you know the original image was. But if I mess with the scale, instead of an individual harmonic moving up and down through the scale, what it's actually doing now is the harmonics are staying where they are, and then they're just becoming louder or softer as the frequency data passes through them. So this or that versus this. Now we have various options about how this works. We have weighting options and then frequency sort of processing modes. And these do very different things, but largely, unless you use some really strange ones, you're not going to see a huge difference in the sound. And that has almost no difference at all. And some of them are quite weird. But largely, we get this. We get a pretty reasonable approximation of the original sound. If we go to advanced, we have image resynthesis quality options. And we get select high precision to be, you know, more precise. And really what this does is it widens the area of influence of the original sound as according to the octaves of the harmonics. See, if I were to hit harmonic protection, and if I put that in scale mode, that's where the that's where it thinks the fundamental tone is for this sound. But if I went back to advanced and brought it back to generic, the audio as we're hearing it is more or less in the same position, but the fundamental tone is an octave higher. And this means that we have we basically compressed all the harmonics by 1 octave to process less of them in the sound. We can even see the quality difference where this area, you know, used up basically 2 harmonics, and this area used up like 8. So that's the difference between those 2 modes. You know, CPU usage varies, that sort of thing. Note that you can actually use harmonic protection even if you're not in this no scale mode. It'll basically force the lower harmonics to be louder, whether or not that is a good idea is more or less up to you. So that's what this sort of scale button does. Then we have this other scale, which is the gain scale. So this is the frequency scale, which is basically the pitch variation scale. And then we have the gain scale. And what this is basically it's more or less visual compression, which is kind of sweet. Because if you look at the picture generated over here, we see that it's we have lighter areas and darker areas. And what this does, what the scale knob does, is it will bring out or take away the contrast of the image. So if I bring it real far down, the sounds that would be really quiet or really dark are suddenly very bright. And if I were to do the opposite, only the sounds that are the loudest and the brightest are visible in this context. So that's more or less what that does. And the mix knob is the mix between the resynthesis versus just all the harmonics. Now, when we're not in flattened scale mode, this is a very kind of noisy sound. But if we were in scale mode, it'd more or less be a phasey version of just the original saw wave. You can get the original saw wave by taking away the sharpness. It's at least closer to the original saw wave. So what does the sharpness do? Well, it actually does something kind of interesting. If you zoom in, I guess we actually kind of can't see in this context. Basically, what ends up happening is that determining on the sharpness, we either have plus 100%, which is transients plus phasiness, or minus 100%, or just, I guess, 100%, which is just transients only. So it's 100% one way, 100% the other way, negative or plus, however that works. You have transients only and then transients plus phasiness, and then this basically determines how the playback jumps around in terms of the individual sampling areas. I'm not sure those are actual samples, but the individual areas that determines where the harmonics are. And then if we have it all the way off, we get more or less a one-to-one playback of the recorded additive samples, if we call them that. This has more ramifications in processed resampling for like the base stuff that I do with Harmor. But typically, I like to keep the sharpness at the default section unless I'm going into flattened scale mode, because that makes it ironically having less sharpness makes it sharper in this particular example. So because this is basically recorded additive samples, like we just came up with that term a minute ago, we can also do speed changes. So if I were to go back to normal, And this is quite a bit more robust than your normal time stretching algorithms because it's not, changing audio playback. It's additive playback. It's much more complex. And as a result, we can do much more interesting things with it. And one of the fun things I like to do is to basically turn speed off and then use a time knob to scrub. And this goes back to a tutorial I had done on how to base a while ago that I call it vocoding with Harmor. And if you think about it, this is basically what's happening. If I turn the scale all the way off, especially, what's happening here is that we can basically accept these harmonics as being bands in the vocoder. 516 of them to be precise. We can show it here. 516 partials. So basically when the audio of the image passes through these individual bands, they light up. The bands are audible. And the only difference between this and the vocoder is that this is note following. The bands move around with note values, which is obviously quite a bit more awesome. And just 516 partials to, Vocodex is 100. So this is also, that's kind of what, what's its head, Razer does with 300 something partials. That's how its vocoder works and inbuilt in. Only difference between our actual vocoder and this is that this is not being layered over a carrier sound. It's just playing sine waves for every individual harmonic kind of thing. So that's kind of cool. It's kind of cool. This level reporting thing is kind of the same thing as the frequency scale options down here, only it's for gain and not frequency. So now we also have formants, the formant option. The time jazz over here is more or less pretty, self-explanatory. We have speed with 100% is the original speed. We also have course speed. If you want to go really fast or really slow, you can do that. And then of course, just your basic time position, which is a rotary, endless knob, as we discussed, like with the phaser offset in the phaser video. But let's talk about formants. So by default, it's off completely. Moving that knob around doesn't do anything because the mix is not engaged. So let's actually just pause it in an area. So we can kind of see what it does, right? You see the main like actual pitches of the sound are remaining the same, but the sort of background kind of atmospheric sounds to the voice are being moved around as we identify them as being formants. Which is all very cool. However, we can be more precise than this. Right now we're basically moving all of them according to this one knob. But if you go to the drop-down menus, we go to over here, we have image formant mutation, which brings us to this plus or minus area. And what this basically does is gives us direct control over spectrum-specific areas of what Harmor is basically given to us as formants. So we can have, some go up, some go down, some other ones go up. And then even all this can be controlled by the knob as well as a whole value. So you can be extremely specific about your formant mutation, which is what that's for. For things like vowel-based resampling, this is very powerful. Over here we have looping options. By default, it's on loop, which means if I just hold the note, it'll eventually come back around and loop. Also have ping pong, which when it gets to the end of where you're going, it'll just bounce back. And then one shot where it'll get to the end and stop. Another cool thing you can do is, in this sort of drop down area, like again, these are mostly pretty self-explanatory, and also what ends up happening is that these are basically all macros. They create things in the envelopes and in the parameters that will do what it says it can do, but that should be pretty obvious that this is just a very a very limited selection of what you can do with the envelopes, like the pitch envelopes, the keyboard mapping envelopes, the time envelopes, all stuff. But one of the built-in ones is this map time offset to last hit key. So if I do that and then select a time offset and then hit map time offset to last hit key and move that there. But then if say I go to another one, right? That's the last key and I want this over here and I go to last hit key. Do it. I'm obviously missing something here. Okay. Right. Time offset, last hit key. All right, so I did it. Now, why was that important? Well, what's happening is that I mapped this position to C or whatever, and then I mapped that position to F, but it's the same pitch. You can see over here in the spectrum, like if I were to go to scale, the pitches are not changing. And this is important because this basically gives you a fast sort of macro tool to map positions of the time of the audio to keys. So if you're playing back like a sample like something like this, but you don't want to change pitch, you can map it so that the time is mapped to a specific key. So that's a pretty helpful tool. Just sort of a quick demonstration of what like a larger thing you can do. If you went into pitch, right, and so you can see over here it actually manually changed the keyboard mapping of that note so that it would be the right pitch. If I were to get rid of this and make it so let's see, higher is lower and lower is higher. If I just make a line straight like that, just get rid of all this. Higher is lower, lower is higher. This makes every single key, every single note the same pitch. Why would you do that? Well, if I go to time mapping, go to articulator, you see it made envelope changes for those specific ones. If I just did that, but then I did this, where's step? Right click. Now I've mapped time to the keyboard. This is kind of like how Nucleon did what he did for my track sometime when he made the vocal glitching linked into Harmor. I didn't actually do that. That was all Nucleon. He kind of put that in the track, and it was a very cool idea. And this is sort of how you accomplish that. I'm not going to cover the more advanced things like how I use image synthesis to do resampling because I've had all the tutorials in the universe on that. But this is more or less all that's necessary to really get how image resynthesis works and how you can get it to do things. I will, however, do one extra thing, which is show you how you do stereo resynthesis, because by default it is mono. Let's find something stereo. So that's stereo. And if I were to drop this, it's in mono. But if I go to B part and turn it on, and then drop that in there as well, now it's mono and louder. But if I go to advanced on A or B and click on the side option, side processing, invert right channel. And when I have both engaged, that's what that one sounds like. That's what that one sounds like. And when they're together, they make the stereo channel. And then if you want to edit it like it's all one thing, you select part link, and then whenever you change any parameter on one part, it's reflected in the other part. So that's how you do stereo resynthesis and how you make it work together. I will say, just for resampling purposes, if you drag something out of Edison and drop it into Harmor, it'll create a drag sample. And then if you drag that same sample and put it into the second part, it actually creates a whole other sample despite being the same sample. So I'd recommend that you go and save the sample and then load them individually into each part so that you're, saving time and space. Yes. Okay, if you have any questions about any of this, let me know. I'm pretty sure I've focused and covered a lot of things about resynthesis. It's sort of It's sort of straightforward, but it's also at the same time not very straightforward. So I believe I did an okay job. But if you have any questions about it, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.